What do Americans really think about having their first ever pope from the United States? Has this historic moment brought them closer to the church, or are old wounds and skepticism still shaping their perceptions? And what does the newest 8 NORC poll tell us about how faith, identity, and leadership intersect in one of the world's most religiously diverse nations? When Pope Leo XIV stepped onto the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, millions of eyes turned toward Rome, and many American Catholics felt something stir. For the first time in history, the Bishop of Rome wasn't European, Latin American, or African. He was from Pennsylvania, his accent familiar, his manner understated, his biography woven into American soil. For Catholic Americans, long shaped by immigrant stories and cultural marginalization, this moment marked a strange and powerful reversal. The local boy had become the universal pastor. In this first exploration, we dive into how Americans are reacting, emotionally, politically, and spiritually, to their first homegrown pope. According to the AP NORC Center for Public Affairs Research, a poll conducted shortly after Leo XIV's election reveals mixed but revealing responses. Among practicing Catholics in the United States, 72% report feeling either very or somewhat proud of having a US-born pope. Many respondents said the election rekindled their interest in church news and reconnected them with traditions that had faded during the pandemic or post-scandal fatigue. Others described a more cautious optimism, hope tempered by a deep awareness of the Church's internal tensions and external pressures. For cultural Catholics, those who no longer attend Mass regularly but still identify with the Church, responses were softer but still significant. 41% said Pope Leo's American identity increased their interest in the Church's future. For them, the new Pope is less a theological figure than a cultural bridge. "It feels like we matter now," one respondent from Detroit said, "like the Church knows we exist." But perhaps the most surprising result came from non-Catholic respondents. Roughly 29% of mainline Protestants and 17% of religiously unaffiliated Americans reported that they had read or listened to something the Pope said during his first week. While some expressed curiosity, others were more reserved. One secular respondent said, "I don't really care where he's from. I care what he's going to do about abuse and corruption." This speaks to one of the underlying dynamics captured by the poll. While origin matters, action matters more. The first American Pope label carries symbolic weight, but the real approval will be won or lost through what Leo XIV chooses to emphasize. Generational divides are also telling. Among Gen Z Catholics, 63% said they felt hopeful about the papacy's direction, and over half said Leo XIV's nationality made them feel seen. This group, more attuned to digital discourse and social movements, is watching closely for how the Pope handles issues of LGBTQ inclusion, racial justice, and environmental stewardship. By contrast, older Catholics, especially those over 65, expressed stronger support for tradition. Many welcomed Leo XIV as a steady hand and hoped he would reaffirm doctrinal clarity. 74% of this group said they preferred the Pope focus on moral teaching rather than church reform. The intergenerational tension mirrors the broader divide playing out in American Catholic parishes between vision and structure, renewal and reverence. Interestingly, regional data reflects subtle cultural differences. In the Midwest and Northeast, areas with deep Catholic roots, enthusiasm was higher. In the South, where evangelicalism dominates, reactions were more muted. Western respondents, where religious disaffiliation is highest, expressed intrigue but little emotional investment. The poll also asked about policy priorities. When asked what they hoped Pope Leo XIV would emphasize, respondents named the following top 5 areas. 1. Clergy sexual abuse accountability. 2. Support for the poor and marginalized. 3. Environmental action and climate response. 4. Women's roles in the Church. 5. Dialogue with youth and disaffected Catholics. These results suggest a church still reckoning with its recent past, while searching for a future that feels morally relevant. Leo XIV's challenge will be to navigate this spectrum of hopes, some compatible, others in conflict, without losing credibility on either side. The early signs, however, are promising. The Pope's initial homilies have struck a tone of gentleness and humility. His first encyclical, still being drafted, is rumored to focus on human dignity, tying together concerns about the unborn, the imprisoned, the migrant, and the planet into a single moral vision. But Americans are watching more than words. They're watching tone. They're watching appointments. They're watching how this Pope embodies the very tension that defines their own national character. Individual freedom versus collective responsibility, idealism versus realism, faith versus doubt. As one respondent from Chicago put it, he's American. That means I expect him to lead with his heart, but I also expect him to get things done. This expectation is uniquely American and uniquely difficult. The modern papacy is a global office with global demands. The Pope doesn't just answer to Catholics in Ohio. He's shepherd to billions, many of whom live in contexts where American priorities don't translate easily. That tension between local pride and global responsibility is where Pope Leo XIV now stands. And how he navigates it may shape the next generation's relationship to the Church more than any single doctrinal clarification ever could. Stay with us as we continue to unpack these developments. In the next section, we'll look at how Pope Leo XIV's American background is shaping perceptions in Europe, Latin America, and the developing world, and whether being the first American Pope helps or hinders his mission on the global stage. When the white smoke cleared and the name Leo XIV was announced from the balcony of St. Peter's, it wasn't just Rome that reacted, it was the world. And while Americans processed the shock and symbolism of having one of their own rise to the chair of Peter, Catholics across the globe watched with a different lens. How does the rest of the world view the first American Pope? And what implications does his nationality carry for global Catholicism? For many, the very concept of an American Pope triggers both fascination and unease. In Europe, where Catholicism has long grappled with declining attendance, increasing secularization, and a lingering cultural skepticism of American religiosity, reactions have been mixed. Traditionalist Catholics in Italy, France, and Germany worry that Leo XIV could bring an activist or managerial style of leadership that reflects the American Church's more pragmatic approach to ecclesial governance. One French commentator even likened it to placing the Vatican in the hands of Wall Street. Yet not all responses are critical. Younger Catholics across Europe, especially in urban hubs like Madrid, Warsaw, and Berlin, have responded positively to Leo XIV's initial gestures. His willingness to speak plainly, embrace digital media, and maintain a humble, everyman tone resonates deeply with younger generations who often feel alienated from hierarchical structures. His pastoral style, they say, feels accessible and authentic. In Latin America, where Pope Francis still holds deep affection, the mood is more complex. For many Catholics in Argentina, Brazil, and Colombia, there's both sorrow at the end of a Latin American papacy and curiosity about what comes next. The AP NORC data shows a noticeable dip in confidence among Latin American Catholics in the weeks following Leo XIV's election, but not out of hostility, more from uncertainty. What will an American Pope mean for the global South, where issues like poverty, indigenous rights, and migration are frontline concerns? Interestingly, Pope Leo XIV's record as Archbishop of Philadelphia may serve him well here. His years of advocacy for immigrants, partnerships with Latino parishes, and Spanish-language masses have been noted favorably by Latin American media outlets. His fluency in Spanish, though not native, is also helping him bridge early gaps. In interviews and public appearances, he's taken care to speak directly to Latino audiences, often invoking themes of mercy, justice, and dignity. Africa's response has been remarkably warm. In countries like Nigeria, Kenya, and Uganda, where Catholicism is growing rapidly, many see Pope Leo as a fresh start. His focus on youth, catechesis, and church renewal resonates with bishops and clergy who are looking for global support in sustaining their flourishing but under-resourced churches. Additionally, Leo's early emphasis on listening, a hallmark of his episcopal style, has reassured many African Catholics that their voices will continue to matter in Rome. However, concerns still exist. Some African bishops are cautious about perceived American liberalism, especially regarding moral theology and cultural influence. They are watching closely to see how Leo XIV addresses issues like gender, family, and sexuality on the global stage. The hope expressed by one Kenyan bishop is that he will not impose American answers on African questions. In Asia, responses have been diverse. In the Philippines, The Catholic giant of the region, the election of Pope Leo XIV sparked joyful celebration. Filipino Catholics, long proud of their global diaspora, welcomed the election as a sign of unity, particularly because the new pope had spent time ministering to Filipino migrant workers in the US and Asia. Filipino media praised his compassion and called him a friend to our people. In more complex territories like China and Vietnam, where the Church operates under significant state scrutiny, the Vatican's choice of an American pope is being interpreted with caution. Chinese Catholics in particular worry that US-China tensions may complicate already fragile Vatican-Beijing relations. Some Church diplomats fear that Leo's nationality, regardless of his personal stance, will be viewed as geopolitical rather than pastoral. This underscores the Papacy's paradox. It is both a spiritual and diplomatic office, and nationality always speaks, whether intended or not. Across the Islamic world, especially in the Middle East, reactions have been largely muted. However, interfaith leaders in countries like Egypt and Jordan issued brief but respectful statements welcoming Leo XIV's election. Many remember his earlier work with Muslim communities in the US and his attendance at interfaith events. A respected imam in Cairo said, "We will judge him by his actions, not his passport." It's clear that Pope Leo XIV enters the world stage, bearing both symbolic baggage and fresh possibility. His Americanness is both a bridge and a barrier, a symbol of the Church's global reach, but also a lightning rod for geopolitical assumptions. To many, America still represents power, influence, and innovation. Whether that will help or hinder his credibility depends on how he leads in the months ahead. What's certain is that Pope Leo is aware of the balancing act. In his first general audience, he thanked all nations, all cultures, all peoples of the Church universal, and deliberately avoided mentioning his own country. When asked by a journalist if he saw himself as an American pope, he replied, "I am the Church's pope. My roots are American, but my mission is Catholic." That distinction between origin and office will be key to navigating the global reaction. For now, many Catholics around the world are watching, praying, and hoping that this first pope from the US will lead not with national pride, but with universal love. In our next segment, we'll explore how Pope Leo XIV's leadership style, shaped by American pastoral models and modern communication tools, is redefining what it means to be pope in a digital age. Pope Leo XIV's approach to leadership is drawing attention not only because of his nationality, but because of how he governs. As the first American to ascend the papal throne, he brings with him a distinct sensibility, one shaped by US parish life, diocesan management, and the unique interplay between religion and public discourse in American society. For better or worse, the American pastoral model is now seated at the center of Catholicism. But what does that actually look like in practice? To begin, Pope Leo XIV's emphasis on accessibility is unmistakable. In the weeks following his election, he made deliberate choices to speak directly to people, not only through formal addresses, but through informal videos, digital messages, and live Q&A sessions streamed from the Vatican gardens. These gestures, though small, marked a clear departure from the more reserved communication style of many of his predecessors. This strategy of accessibility reflects his background as a parish priest and later a bishop in the digital age. In Philadelphia, he was known for hosting town halls, replying personally to emails, and even live-streaming Holy Week homilies during the pandemic. He approached his flock not as a distant ruler, but as a spiritual father whose door and inbox was open. This same approach now colors his papacy. During his first week, Leo XIV launched a digital feedback portal called Speak to Peter, allowing Catholics worldwide to submit prayer intentions, pastoral concerns, and even questions. The site quickly crashed from high traffic. When it reopened, thousands had already submitted their thoughts, many from places where Catholics rarely feel heard by Rome. It's a bold move. Critics say it risks overwhelming the Vatican with noise. Supporters call it a sign of humility, a pope willing to listen before speaking. Either way, it signals a shift in how authority is expressed, not by aloofness, but by relational presence. Another hallmark of Leo XIV's leadership is his focus on delegation and collaborative governance. American bishops often operate with strong diocesan staffs, lay advisory councils, and task forces. Leo XIV has brought that model into the Vatican, forming new multidisciplinary teams that include lay theologians, female religious, communications experts, and even married couples with backgrounds in pastoral ministry. Already, these teams are influencing key areas. For instance, a new committee on youth evangelization has been charged not just with writing documents, but with piloting in-person and online programs in 10 countries over the next year. Similarly, a task force on parish revitalization is studying best practices from dioceses across 5 continents and will release a pastoral toolkit for bishops next spring. This focus on data-informed collaborative ministry is classic American church methodology, drawn from decades of operating in a competitive religious landscape. In the US, where Catholics share space with evangelical megachurches, Mormon outreach and secular activism, the Church has had to adapt to remain relevant. Pope Leo's leadership reflects that experience, pragmatic, people-focused, and responsive. But this pragmatism is also rooted in prayer. One of the first internal policies he established was a daily hour of Eucharistic adoration for all senior Vatican officials. He attends silently alongside them, often without fanfare. His spiritual director from Philadelphia, now based in Rome, says Leo believes the more responsibility you carry, the more silence you need. It's this blend of pastoral immediacy and contemplative depth that is beginning to define his papacy. He does not speak with thunderous proclamations. Rather, he leads like a parish priest with the weight of the world on his shoulders, conscious that his voice must reach not just the faithful, but the fragile, the forgotten, and the far away. And his voice is reaching. His homily at the first Sunday Angelus, spoken in simple language with no prepared script, was watched by over 30 million people within 3 days. Social media platforms lit up with reactions not only from Catholics, but from journalists, artists, former believers, and curious skeptics. What drew them in wasn't doctrine, it was tone, a sense that the Pope wasn't just performing religion, but living it out in real time. Yet this style comes with its own risks. In trying to be present everywhere, Leo XIV may risk overexposure. His constant availability could raise unrealistic expectations. Already, some Vatican insiders worry that his American work ethic may burn him out, especially given the demanding pace he has set. There are also institutional tensions to manage. Not everyone in the Roman Curia is comfortable with Leo's flatter, more collaborative approach. Some officials fear that decentralizing decision-making could dilute papal authority or lead to doctrinal ambiguity. Others, particularly from more hierarchical cultures, see his informality as bordering on irreverence. Still, Leo remains undeterred. He frequently cites St. Augustine's phrase, "With you I am a Christian, for you I am a bishop," as his guiding principle. For Leo XIV, the papacy is not a throne to defend, but a relationship to steward. He views governance not as command, but as accompaniment. This philosophy is evident in his early appointments. His first curial nominations included a laywoman with experience in international diplomacy, a Nigerian bishop with a track record in interreligious dialogue, and a Jesuit theologian known for his work on conscience and synodality. Each choice signals a church open to voices often left at the margins. His vision for church leadership is less about reform through force and more about renewal through trust. He's betting that if people feel seen, they'll be more willing to listen. If they feel heard, they'll be more open to grow. In the next part, we'll explore how Pope Leo XIV is approaching some of the Church's most sensitive moral and doctrinal debates, including sexuality, gender, and life issues, and how his distinctly American background shapes his response to a world in flux. As Pope Leo XIV continues to define his papacy, one of the most closely watched aspects is how he addresses the Church's most sensitive moral and doctrinal challenges. From sexuality and gender to abortion and family life, these are issues that transcend borders and divide pews. How a pope responds to them not only shapes ecclesial policy, but signals how the Church intends to engage with the modern world. In this fourth section, we examine how Pope Leo's American pastoral sensibilities intersect with global Catholic teachings, and how his early words and actions are being received across ideological and generational divides. To begin, Pope Leo XIV has made clear that he will not abandon church doctrine. In his first major interview since ascending the papacy, he reaffirmed Catholic teaching on the sanctity of life, marriage between a man and a woman, and the unchanging nature of truth. "Doctrine does not change," he said plainly, "but our way of accompanying people must be full of patience, truth, and mercy." This triad, patience, truth, and mercy, has become something of a signature for Leo. It signals continuity with recent papacies, especially Francis's emphasis on pastoral accompaniment, but also reflects his own American formation. In the United States, priests often navigate a highly polarized cultural landscape. They must minister to parishioners who hold widely different political and social views, and Leo XIV brings this pastoral dexterity with him. Take, for example, his approach to LGBTQ Catholics. In a letter sent to a group of US Catholic parents of LGBTQ children, the Pope wrote, "You are not alone. Your children are not invisible. You are loved, and so are they." The letter, while not doctrinally groundbreaking, was deeply personal. It was accompanied by a photo of the Pope holding a candle from an LGBTQ outreach mass he had celebrated as Archbishop. The reaction was swift and split. Progressive Catholic voices welcomed the tone as healing, while some traditionalists expressed concern about ambiguity. But Leo's team was quick to clarify the Church's teaching remains intact and no moral teachings had changed. Instead, this was a matter of proximity, how the Church stands beside people in complicated situations. In another instance, when asked by reporters about abortion, Pope Leo was unequivocal. "The unborn deserve protection," he said, "but so do the women who carry them, the poor, the abandoned, the desperate." His emphasis on the broader context, economic, psychological, and spiritual, echoes his years of ministry in crisis pregnancy centers and Catholic healthcare systems. This both and language, protecting life and supporting women, is characteristic of the American pro-life movement's evolution in recent years, and Leo XIV seems to bring that dual emphasis into his papacy. He has already instructed the Pontifical Academy for Life to draft new guidelines that link pro-life ethics with global development goals, especially those focused on maternal health, education, and poverty reduction. When it comes to gender roles, Leo XIV has shown openness to expanding the influence of women in the Church, though not in ways that depart from established doctrine. He has appointed women to senior roles in Vatican finance, communications, and diplomacy, and has spoken publicly about the genius of women in shaping the Church's moral and spiritual imagination. But on the question of women's ordination, he has reiterated John Paul II's definitive statement in Ordinatio Sacerdotalis. The Church has no authority to confer priestly ordination on women. Yet he has also called for a re-examination of how the Church prepares, listens to, and empowers women in every other capacity, from catechesis to diocesan leadership. "If women are not fully engaged," he said, "we are not fully alive." One of the most revealing moments of Leo XIV's pastoral approach came during an unannounced visit to a women's shelter in Rome. He spent hours speaking with survivors of abuse, single mothers, and migrant women, none of whom had any idea they'd be meeting the Pope. Afterwards, one of them said, "He didn't preach, he didn't judge, he just listened and cried." This model of presence, ministry without a microphone, has endeared him to many, but has also drawn criticism from some who want firmer doctrinal clarity. "He's too vague," one traditionalist blogger complained. "You don't know what he really thinks." But that may be intentional. Pope Leo seems less interested in telling the world where he stands than in showing the world where he kneels. Even on hot-button issues like gender identity, Pope Leo has avoided slogans. In one address to Catholic educators, he urged them to uphold the integrity of Catholic anthropology, while also creating spaces of dignity and safety for all students. He neither endorsed gender ideology nor dismissed the real struggles of those affected by it. It's a narrow line to walk, but one he seems committed to. As debates continue across parishes and social media, Leo XIV's method is becoming clearer. He is not a culture warrior, nor is he a revolutionary. He is, above all, a pastor, one who believes that doctrine must not only be taught, but lived, and that truth without love becomes brittle. This balance, orthodoxy with empathy, is perhaps most evident in how he speaks to youth. In recent World Youth Day messages, he's emphasized that young people crave more than affirmation. They crave challenge, depth, and truth. But they also need to know they're not alone. His papacy, he says, must show the face of Christ not in rules first, but in relationship. As one young Catholic from Los Angeles tweeted after hearing the Pope's address, "He didn't say everything I wanted to hear, but he made me want to keep listening." In the next part, we'll explore how Pope Leo XIV is engaging the political landscape, not only within the Vatican but globally, and how he balances American civic instincts with a truly Catholic diplomacy. From the very beginning of his papacy, Pope Leo XIV has faced the challenge of navigating political perception as carefully as he navigates theological doctrine. Being the first American pope has brought with it a distinct set of expectations and assumptions. To the secular world, America is synonymous with political power, global influence, and polarization. To the Church, the US is often viewed as both a resource-rich missionary field and a deeply divided Catholic culture. Pope Leo's every gesture is being interpreted through this dual lens. What does an American pope mean for church diplomacy, and how does he separate himself from nationalistic symbolism? One of Leo XIV's earliest tests came within days of his election, when he was asked during a press conference whether he would bring American values to the Vatican. His response was firm and nuanced. "The only values I bring are those shaped by the gospel and the Church's long tradition. My homeland gave me formation. My baptism gave me a mission." Still, the American political tone has a way of seeping into how people interpret religious leadership. Conservative outlets quickly hoped Leo XIV would be tough on doctrine and clear on culture wars, while liberal voices projected onto him a progressive reformer. He has disappointed both camps, refusing to speak in headlines, choosing pastoral language over partisanship, and yet he is not apolitical. Leo XIV sees political structures as necessary realities that must be shaped by ethical conscience. In his first major encyclical, still in the drafting stage but already drawing attention, he's expected to address the vocation of politics, calling on leaders around the world to seek truth, justice, and human dignity over ideology and economic advantage. Behind the scenes, Leo XIV has begun reorganizing the Vatican's diplomatic corps. He has elevated envoys with reputations for bridge building rather than confrontation. In place of purely career diplomats, he's bringing in pastors and theologians who understand both local cultures and global responsibility. One of his first appointments was a bishop from the Amazon region with deep experience in indigenous rights advocacy. This emphasis on relational diplomacy, rather than power projection, is deliberate. Leo XIV has repeatedly emphasized the image of the Pope not as a global statesman, but as a servant who helps the world see the Church's face as one of peace, not politics. But political entanglements are hard to avoid. The Vatican's relations with the United States government are under constant scrutiny, especially given Leo's nationality. Some fear that his papacy could lead to undue influence by US bishops or Catholic lobbyists. To counter that, the Pope has insisted on maintaining a firm boundary between the American hierarchy and his internal decision-making. Several appointments have surprised commentators by favoring voices from the global South over traditionally powerful dioceses like New York or Washington. On international issues, Pope Leo XIV has prioritized multilateral engagement. He has spoken against the use of war as policy, urged restraint in global conflicts, and quietly facilitated back-channel talks in several conflict zones. His approach echoes Catholic social teaching's preference for dialogue and solidarity, and reflects his American roots in diplomacy, shaped by civic pluralism. In climate policy, Leo has doubled down on the legacy of Laudato Si. He has spoken often of the moral responsibility of industrialized nations, especially the United States, to lead in ecological conversion. However, unlike his predecessor, he has framed environmental protection not primarily as activism, but as spiritual stewardship. "The Earth is not a resource," he said in a recent address. "It is a relative, a gift, and we are its keepers." This theological grounding is consistent with his American Catholic upbringing, where the intersection of nature and faith, especially through monastic traditions and ecological retreats, has long been nurtured. His commitment has already influenced several Vatican initiatives, including a new round of grants for dioceses that link evangelization with environmental renewal. Domestically, Leo XIV has asked American bishops to step out of political reaction cycles. In a private meeting, he reportedly told them, "We must speak with moral clarity, not partisan noise." His guidance to bishops has been to prioritize encounter over enforcement, to be shepherds, not pundits. Still, he has not shied away from confronting injustice. On immigration, Pope Leo has been vocal about the need for humane policies. Drawing on his own ministry with migrant communities, he has criticized both xenophobia and bureaucratic indifference. In one powerful speech to European diplomats, he said, "Every migrant is a question Christ is asking the Church." He has also voiced concerns about global inequality, corporate greed, and political corruption. But in each case, his language avoids slogans. Instead, he chooses parables, scriptural echoes, and relational appeals. "It is not enough to win elections," he said. "A good society must win the soul." One of the most striking aspects of Leo XIV's political engagement is his refusal to be trapped in left or right. When asked by a reporter how he would position himself politically, he answered, "I follow the compass of the cross. It points not to ideology, but to Calvary." This orientation is reflected in how he handles controversy. In the face of rising populism in Europe, he has called for dialogue. In countries facing religious persecution, he has sent handwritten letters of solidarity. In the midst of global economic uncertainty, he has emphasized Catholic teaching on subsidiarity and the dignity of labor. Even his travel plans reflect political sensitivity. Rather than start with a high-profile trip to the US or Europe, Leo XIV's first apostolic visit is expected to be to a developing nation, possibly in Africa or Southeast Asia. The message is clear. This is a pope for the margins, not for the media cycle. And yet he remains deeply American in spirit, not in ideology, but in temperament. He brings a democratic attentiveness to his office, a conviction that leadership must be earned daily through listening and service. He sees politics not as a ladder to climb, but a platform from which to lift others. In our final section, we'll reflect on how Pope Leo XIV's presence is shaping Catholic identity in the US and abroad, and why his papacy may mark a turning point not only in church leadership, but in how the faithful imagine what it means to belong, believe, and hope. As Pope Leo XIV settles into his role as the universal pastor, Catholics across the world, and especially in the United States, are beginning to reflect on what his election means just for governance, but for identity. The first American pope has not merely arrived. He is now shaping the global imagination of what Catholicism can be in the 21st century. And the early signs suggest that he's shifting the focus away from division and toward a deeper, shared sense of mission. In the US, Pope Leo's rise has stirred something unexpected: unity across difference. While tensions still exist between traditionalists and progressives, bishops and laypeople, young and old, his presence has managed to generate a rare kind of spiritual cohesion. In the latest follow-up from the AP NORC poll, 62% of American Catholics said they feel more connected to the Universal Church since his election. Even among non-practicing Catholics, nearly half reported a renewed interest in faith-related news and events. Parishes across the country are feeling it. In dioceses from Boston to San Diego, mass attendance has seen a modest uptick, especially among young adults. Many parishioners have shared that hearing a homily or reading a statement from one of our own makes church teachings feel more relevant and more approachable. Priests report that the Pope's humble tone and honest engagement with tough questions have opened up new conversations in confessional booths and Bible studies alike. In Catholic schools and universities, Leo XIV has become a figure of curiosity and engagement. Theology professors have adjusted syllabi to include his early encyclicals and interviews. Campus ministries report record attendance at papal watch parties and student-led discussion nights. One campus chaplain put it simply, "He's giving us permission to love the church again." But it's not only in America that this effect is being felt. Globally, Leo XIV is reframing Catholic identity through three pillars that transcend borders: humility, hope, and hospitality. Rather than focusing on institutional strength, he emphasizes gospel vulnerability. Rather than promising certainty in every moral dilemma, he offers accompaniment. And rather than defending borders, physical or spiritual, he calls the church to build bridges. This approach has deeply impacted migrant communities, refugees, and diasporas. For many who live in the margins, economically, socially, or spiritually, Leo XIV's message not as theory but as salvation. His visits to shelters, letters to incarcerated Catholics, and stories from immigrant parishes in the US have become models for local church outreach worldwide. Even among critics, there is growing respect for the Pope's consistency. Though some theologians worry his openness may blur doctrine, they also acknowledge his commitment to orthodoxy paired with sincerity. He has not changed dogma, but he has changed the atmosphere. Pope Leo XIV's greatest contribution, however, may be his ability to reawaken Catholic imagination. In a world where institutions are distrusted and religion is often caricatured, he paints a vision of the Church not as fortress, but as field hospital. Not as elite sanctuary, but as common home. And in doing so, he reminds believers that Catholic identity is not a political stance or cultural label. It's a sacramental life lived in communion with others, under the gaze of mercy. The ripple effects are only beginning. Dioceses are launching new listening sessions, not just as part of synodal processes, but as regular practice. Bishops' conferences are requesting more training in conflict resolution and accompaniment. Lay people are creating art, writing songs, and forming movements inspired by the Pope's words. His emphasis on Eucharistic reverence, simplicity, and hospitality is reshaping liturgical planning in cathedrals and mission churches alike. Perhaps most striking is the return of hope. For years, many Catholics, especially younger generations, have felt torn between loyalty and disillusionment. Scandals, rigidity, and polarization have pushed many away, but Leo XIV is changing that. Not by ignoring the pain, but by standing inside it, by choosing transparency over triumphalism, by being above all a witness before being a ruler. His daily routine is part of the message: early morning prayer, handwritten letters to struggling communities, quiet meals with guests who have no titles. It's a life rooted in simplicity, and it is slowly rekindling the faith of those who thought the Church had forgotten them. Of course, his papacy is still young. Challenges remain immense. The clerical abuse crisis is far from resolved. Doctrinal tensions simmer beneath the surface. Political pressures pull from all sides. But Pope Leo XIV seems unshaken. He knows that he cannot solve everything, but he also knows something greater. That holiness is not measured in resolutions, but in fidelity, in staying, in serving, in loving. And perhaps that's why this moment matters so much. For the first time in recent memory, Catholics don't just have a pope they admire. They have a pope who reflects them, understands them, and walks with them. If you followed this journey, thank you. At Think Fresh Daily, we're committed to bringing you closer to the heart of Catholic life, through clarity, honesty, and hope. Subscribe, share, and stay with us as we continue to unpack what Pope Leo XIV's leadership means for the Church, the world, and each of us who believe that the Spirit still moves, even now. The story isn't over, it's just beginning.